Well, good afternoon and welcome to a session on citizens' assemblies and deliberative democracy. My name is Iain Walker from the newDemocracy Foundation in Australia. What an event to be at, where we're held and hosted, starring the US Secretary of State coming along. Good chance to meet every policeman in Seoul, seemingly on the way in. So it's a major chance for democracy when you actually see a Secretary of State and indeed ministers turning up to talk. It's a great start for this event. Welcome to many people on YouTube. With funny time zones, this is an event that a lot of people will be watching on delay. That's okay. Hopefully what we're going to deliver for you is something on behalf of an entire global cohort of organisations just like us. As an Australian, I think I'm here because I'm pretty local to the Asian region. But indeed, there's 55 organisations like us in a network called Democracy R&D that stretches to people like Deliberative in Brazil, across through South America at Colombia, the team at Mass LBP in Canada, across into Europe with organisations like FIDE, and involve so many people who've contributed to the ideas here today. We're a small, coherent field, and what we really want you to do is engage with an idea. Today, we're aiming to put a lot of people in one place to give you a lot of perspectives. And as I go around and do the introductions, what I want you to get a feel for is there are NGOs, there are people who work inside the government, and a political perspective as well. So, what is it we want to show you? I want to start with a little bit of a scene setter. We heard a lot yesterday about the problem that needed to be solved. I just want to draw on a little bit of inspiring text that actually Art drafted back in the day. Why are we here? Many people legitimately feel that they do not have a voice in our democracy anymore. And that's the problem we want to solve. They don't feel they've got power in shaping the decisions that affect their lives. Trust in experts is declining. Misinformation and disinformation are prevalent. And polarisation, often driven by electoral incentives, is on the rise. Citizens' assemblies are a simple idea to bring a mix of the community together and ask them to solve a problem. And it's complementary to what we do in our parliaments. Being an elected official is tough, and I hope you might expand on that through this. It's a tough and thankless job. So what can we do to actually build trust so that we get past that, some of our reflexive reactions, and actually more closely identify with the public decisions being taken? Citizens' assemblies do not just address the symptoms of a democratic malaise. They get to the heart of the underlying driver on it. It's hard to be heard. So, in our session today, we're going to go on a little journey. I'm going to give you the basics. I'm just going to step through, what is this idea? What are the 5 principles that it really hangs off? Why would you do it? And how the cohort can help you get started. After that, we're going to hear 2 amazing case studies. One of those case studies is that of Ireland, one of the most repeated stories that everyone in democratic advocacy uses. It's one of the most iconic stories of reform. When I speak to any Australian politician and describe what happens in Ireland, the most common response is, that is 20 times harder than anything we would attempt, and they did it 10 times better than what we do. And after that, after we've heard from both Art in the bureaucracy and Iain from a political perspective, well, then we're going to cross to the European Commission, who did the largest scale project ever attempted. Imagine taking on the myriad of languages and cultures across Europe in a single conversation. And I hope by being grounded in practical examples, you're really going to get a feel for this. So Gaetane will be joining us at awful o'clock in Paris, very shortly on the Zoom. After those 2 case studies have told us a story, we're delighted to be joined by Gillian from the OECD, who've done so much work. We want to give you a whirlwind overview of the work and research they've done. So why are we doing this? Because we're hoping that those of you watching are looking for, hey, that's a problem I need to solve. We're hoping that you're going to look and see, wow, someone's run real live national and multinational projects doing this. We're hoping that you're going to hear that one of the most respected organisations looking across governance and governments is looking at this and applying rigour and analysis. For a lot of the people watching on YouTube, we want this to be the 1 hour presentation that you can show your boss. And that's really the aspiration. Now, after you've heard from all these speakers, hopefully not with too much fatigue, we want your questions. We want you thinking about, how would I apply this in my country? If you can detect from my Australian accent, we love sceptical, critical questions. It's how you explore and pull apart an idea. So I'd encourage you, those of you watching, those of you online, don't be polite. Ask the hard question. If you can trip us up, we all need to go home because we've operated large complex projects. After we've had that Q&A, we're going to close with a little inspiration from a British MP, a former British MP, who spent 30 years inside the Houses of Parliament. May have left a mark along the way, but he wants to motivate us to think even bigger. And hopefully that's going to give you the tour of citizens' assemblies. This is something I'd hate to take another look at. So we should get into it. I'm on the wrong slide deck, guys. So if you can, I'm not clicking. There we go. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes with you giving you the basics of what you're listening to today. What is a citizens' assembly? Many of you will be familiar with the criminal jury. Now, it's only a rough analogy, and not all countries have the jury, but work with me here. In Australia, I can turn on the TV news and see that someone's been convicted of a very serious crime. And you know what my reaction is? Well, I guess he did it. We have a mechanism in our society that is widely trusted, where we don't think that's been manipulated by donors, by money in politics, by a need for media profile. We have a mechanism that we trust. And as a broad analogy, can we take that from the justice system and apply those lessons as a bolt-on to our political system? It's not a perfect analogy. And you're going to hear a little bit that's quite different. But fundamentally, all we're really doing is bringing together a group of people from all walks of life, rich and poor, old and young, all different cultures and backgrounds. And we're doing something that happens decreasingly in our society today, is we're putting them in one room so they mix. Think of all the siloing that occurs on social media and start to think, if that's a problem, how do you counter it? It's simple. You run a lottery and you ask people to come together and solve a problem and give them the best democratic experience you can. What does that mean practically? Like, how do you get your head around this idea? The easiest way is to think about just 5 principles. These are going to be the 5 most obvious things you've probably heard this year. But every time I have this conversation, I ask governments, and how many of those do you do? And the answer is 0. Thinking about engagement with citizens, are you speaking to a representative group of people? Or are you speaking to the enraged and the articulate? And we generally get there via a democratic lottery. Hard to cheat a lottery. If I could cheat the lottery, I wouldn't be standing here. I'd be on a nice island somewhere. Are they considering diverse and contested information? Most people offering feedback to government are offering 1 or 0 sources. They're just shooting from the hip and telling you what they don't like. Imagine a group of people who'd weighed and contested evidence before offering you that view. Thirdly, is this a group of people who've been given enough time to do that properly? We all know that sense of being rushed and being pushed. If you want to take a real mix of people, if you want them to consider that information, then we need to give them enough time to do the job. And what you're going to hear from both our Irish and European Commission speakers is great examples of citizens being given the respect and the duration that's required. 4th principle is there's some pre-agreed level of authority. If you want to get regular people to give up days and days of their time, well, there's a group of people who'll turn up at 7 o'clock on a wet Sunday morning to tell you what they think. But regular people want to know what you're doing with the information. And the last principle is, are we asking people an open question and giving them a free response? There is a lot of government engagement that involves presenting a draft that says comment, and then the final version doesn't look all that different from the draft version. Whereas in a citizens' assembly, you really want to get that free expression of what citizens want to say. So that is a whirlwind summary of this concept, but I will leave it to other speakers to go into detail. Why would you do it? We contend that there's some decisions in politics that are too hard for politics. A lot of people say to politicians, show leadership and ignore public opinion. If you ignore public opinion, you become a former politician. We haven't built a system that actually enables a structure that lets you get on top of that. We've built a system that is so responsive to public opinion. And instead, what we should do is be creating one that is more responsive to public judgment. So why do it? Do it because you're stuck. It's not for every issue, it's for a complex issue. Think about one of the greatest assets in politics. It's having regular people standing next to you. In the high vis because they're working people. Maybe at a childcare centre holding a baby because you care about families. Citizens' assemblies deliver a trusted political asset. They deliver you a group of people who, well, they are regular people. They have day jobs. It's your plumber, your taxi driver, your dentist, your small business owner down the road actually coming together. That's why these work. Do you know who we're most inclined to trust? People kind of like ourselves. The Edelman Trust Barometer points to the fact people we most trust are work colleagues, our friends, are our social colleagues. Well, let's take that social circle and actually create a mechanism, just like the courts have, to give people a constructive, informed say. So we do this for trust. Now, what I hope you're going to take away from this is this is all interesting. How do I get started? And the work of this cohort was simply to provide 11 ideas for actually taking that first step. In many ways, if you take nothing else away of how do I get started, remember the name Democracy R&D, because we can connect people in pretty much any country, which connects back to us and all the people you'll hear from here. Also takes a weight off Art, who I believe hears from about 40 countries a year directly. Well, with that, I want you to start to think about, how do I apply this in my country? What's going to stop it working? I'm worried about something. Start to think of those questions. Citizens' assemblies are a way to bring about much greater public trust. But I've only told you a bit of the concept. Now let's hear what it's real when someone has, what I hope you're going to hear is a very hard problem to solve. Art, have you got a hard problem to solve that you solved a few years ago? Thank you.
Míle buíochas, Iain. Thank you very much. Is mór an ordum bheith an ócáid speisialta seo. It's a great privilege for me to be here with you on this very special occasion. I've been thinking about this moment for a number of years now and absolutely delighted to be here in Seoul. I'm going to tell you a story about Ireland and citizens' assemblies. It started about 12 years ago. 11 o'clock at night, I was sitting in my sofa at home watching reruns of The West Wing, getting ready to go to bed, and my phone rang and my heart sank. I was working as an official in the National Assembly in the Parliament at the time, and I had responsibility for communications, and I assumed it was an editor of a newspaper with a story that was going to make my life miserable for the following week. So I nervously answered the phone. Hello? Hello, Art. It was our Prime Minister. And I don't know about you, but nobody rings me at 11 o'clock at night to say they're having a good day. So I wondered what was coming next. The Prime Minister said, Art, I have a job for you. And I said, well, this will be a very short conversation, Prime Minister. I already have a job, thank you very much. He said, no. We have this thing in our programme for government. It's never, ever going to work. But we promised we would do it, so we have to do it. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, it's called the Constitutional Convention. And I said, yeah. And he said, yeah, we're going to put 100 people in a room, and we're going to ask them a whole series of very hard questions. And then when they tell us what to do in answer to these questions, we're going to see what we can do about that. And I said, yeah, you're right, Prime Minister, that's never going to work. And he said, I know, but this government had just been elected after the financial crisis with a promise of transformation. We were going to do things differently. The old ways didn't work, so we have to change. We have to try something new. So we had a conversation. It lasted about an hour. And at the end of this hour, I said to the Prime Minister, let me see if I have you straight. As long as I don't kill anybody or spend any money, I can do whatever I like with this group of 100 people. And he said, I knew you were the man for me. So I rang my boss and said, boss, I have a job to do. I'll be back in 6 months. And nothing astonishes me more that 12 years later, I'm still talking about that experience. And even worse, I'm still doing it. I ran a couple of citizens' assemblies in my spare time last year. Something's going on in the world right now. Political systems are calling out for citizens to become more and more involved in decision-making and policy development. And citizens increasingly want to become more involved in having their voice heard and to make a contribution into policy development and decision-making. This is the 45th country in which I've spoken in the last 2 years. And being a shy and retiring type, I don't go around countries forcing myself on them. People have come and knocked on the door and said, we need to do something to involve our citizens. We hear Ireland have a story to tell. Can you please tell me? So for those of you watching on YouTube, this is going to save you many, many years of looking at the exploits that Ireland has had with citizens' assemblies. So for the next 7 or 8 minutes, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Ireland's journey. We better first start off with the problems. There are 2 difficulties with citizens' assemblies and 2 complaints that are regularly made wherever they are set up in the world. The first one is, we already have a citizens' assembly. It's called a parliament. Why do we need a group of unelected people in a room making decisions on our behalf? Citizens' assemblies are not a threat to the political system. For 90 of the first 100 years of Ireland's existence, we have developed policy and made decisions in using 3 separate factors. We elect governments and politicians with manifestos who say this is what we're going to do when we get into government. Secondly, there's people like me, mostly chaps in grey suits and comb-overs who provide advice on policy matters, specialist advice. And thirdly, we engage with stakeholders, so people with skin in the game. All we do with citizens' assemblies is to create a 4th leg to this 3-legged stool to allow us to enrich and enhance the decision-making process. The second complaint that people have about citizens' assemblies is that, it's just a focus group. And they speak about focus groups in a very pejorative way. And there's one big difference between a focus group and a citizens' assembly. With a focus group, a polling company normally puts a group of people in a room, representative of the society, and they ask them a whole lot of questions. Who's your favorite political party leader? What's your favorite breakfast cereal? Who does your life insurance? What do you think the government should do about marriage equality, abortion, et cetera, et cetera? And at the end of that process, they write down the answers and they publish the news. Here's what the Irish people think about all of these questions. With the Citizens' Assembly, we put these people in a room and we fill them with information. We make them experts in the subject, and at the end of that process, then we ask them the question, what do you think we should do about marriage equality or abortion? And what we get is a reasoned, expert opinion from ordinary citizens. There are 3 big ingredients, 3 the biggest ingredients to a successful citizens' assembly in our experience. And one is the representativeness of the room. What we like to do is create Ireland in one room, 100 people. Some of this stuff is very easy. We need to engineer the membership randomly to represent Irish society. So we send out 20,000 invitations to random households all around Ireland, and we ask people to volunteer to get involved. In our most recent Citizens' Assembly, the response rate was about 13%. So 2,500 people put their hands up and said, I would like to spend 6 weekends in the next year in a room with 99 of my fellow citizens dealing with this problem. You know, there's something very empowering on the first day at the first meeting. You stand on a platform and you look into a sea of faces gazing up at the stage. They know why they're there, but they don't really know how this is going to work. And you stand on the stage and say, the government has a problem. They don't really know how to solve it. Will you please come and help us work it out? The citizens do that in spades. So we create the room. We create our representation of Irish society. Some of it is easy. We've got 51 women and 49 men. We've 12 people between the age of 18 and 24. We have 28 people from our capital city in Dublin, which mirrors the population. But we delve even more deeply into that too. We've got 4 farmers, because 4% of our population are farmers. We have 11 people with a disability, 17 people who weren't born in our country. So we build layer by layer Ireland in one room. And in the Citizens' Assembly that dealt with the issue of women's health and abortion, reproductive rights, the citizens made a recommendation which went way, way beyond that which was expected of the Assembly. Our political system and our media were shocked, very shocked by this. And they said, whoa, citizens' assemblies, they don't work anymore. The Irish people will never go for that. In the room, the citizens voted for a very liberal regime of abortion in our country. They voted 67 to 33 in favor of this regime. When the government put this question to the people in a referendum, the result was 66-34. That proves 2 things. One was that this room was perfectly representative of the Irish people. And secondly, and much more importantly from my perspective, is that the Irish people's thinking on this issue was much more sophisticated and much more nuanced than the political system understood or gave them credit for. And I think that's the real power of citizens' assemblies. So, representativeness, Ireland in one room, that's the first issue. The second one is not every issue is suitable for a citizens' assembly. After the success of marriage equality, abortion, climate change, a couple of other issues, the political system went, whoa, we've now found the solution to all of life's problems. Please don't think like that. That's not the way it works. In the current climate, you might think about looking at nuclear power as an energy source, and which could be a fair thing to ask a citizens' assembly. But would you ask a citizens' assembly to design you a nuclear power station? Probably not. You know, so be very, very careful when you are picking the issue that you'd like a group of citizens to have a look at. The third issue, and I'll leave you with this, is what happens with the Citizens' Assembly recommendations after they have reported. All of the big failures of citizens' assemblies around the world generally come from some level of inaction after the assemblies have reported. So we have had many, many stories of governments who established citizens' assemblies, didn't like the recommendations, and just threw them on a shelf, and they rotted away. In Ireland, we're not bad at this. The government brings a proposal to establish assembly to the National Assembly, the Parliament, where they are established as independent creatures and given their own life and independence and budget to go and work out their recommendations. And when the recommendations come back, normally about a year later, the Parliament establishes a special committee to consider these recommendations, where people can make political judgments about the recommendations. And now the government has two reports to consider, the recommendations and the political view. And when that happens, the government comes into the Parliament and generally, in a special debate, outlines which recommendations they're going to accept, and more importantly, they outline the recommendations which are not going to be accepted, and they give the reason why. It's fully transparent. Everybody knows at the outset that the recommendations may not necessarily be adopted, but it puts pressure on the Citizens' Assembly themselves to come up with reasoned explanations. So that in a nutshell, and I have given this speech where it has lasted 2 days. I think you can count yourselves lucky that you got away with 11 minutes. So I'll be happy to take questions at the end of the session. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Art. I hope you enjoyed that story. I know from experience there'll be a lot of people on YouTube just doing the skip to the 9-minute mark just to get straight into the Irish story. A number of Australian politicians who've said you'll change politics if you just get that guy to meet our Parliament for 30 minutes. So thank you for coming here and sharing the story. Now, most of us who work in democratic reform, there's an ideal and you think, that's great, but what will the politicians think? And we were very fortunate to have Oisin Smythe in town to actually give that perspective firsthand, and hopefully have some entertaining questions later. So thank you for making the time, and let's hear a political perspective on this mechanism. Thank you.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm going to talk about citizens' assemblies. What are they for? Why are we doing them? How do they work? And how do they not work? So it's a thing we have in Ireland, and it is a method of engaging with the public to solve problems that don't seem to work through the parliamentary system. I am an engineer by training, software developer. So my mindset when I came into politics, only a few years ago, was you have a problem, figure out what it is, make sure you understand what the problem is and who it's affecting, and then to come up with a solution, think about it, try it out, test it, and then get it to work. So that's basically my idea. I went into politics with this mindset, I'm going to fix problems in the world. And then, of course, I found out that's not how it works, because instead of having long discussions about what the problem is and listening to people and so on, everything gets shortened down to a couple of words. There isn't much time in the public mind. You're talking to people, you're trying to sell them an idea, and they've got maybe 3 seconds to think about what you're saying. And so you get phrases like stop the boats, or take back control, or make America great again. And the whole debate is centered around 2 of those phrases, one on one side and one on the other. And you have to say which one you subscribe to, which one do you agree with, and sometimes there's no room in the center for where the answer is, you know? And you know that phrase, the truth lies in between? Truth often does lie in between. Both sides have some of the truth. Both sides are right in some way, but somewhere in the middle is a compromise that can work for everybody. That's the answer, that's the solution. And we can't reach that solution because everything has become so polarized. So the Citizens' Assembly helps to solve that problem. As a politician, sometimes I'm in an interview, and you see politicians being interviewed, and they get asked, you know, Minister, are you for or against this? Are you A or are you B? Are you pro-life or are you pro-choice? Just give me an answer, yes or no. And if you don't give a direct answer, and I'm a very direct person, it looks like you're a snake, you're trying to avoid the question, you know, and the person watching is frustrated. Go on, just say A or B, A or B. And so when you give an answer like, well, it depends, you know, and it's a balance of rights, and we have to sort something out. People are really, really unhappy with that, even though that is the answer. And so that's the challenge. So I'm going to very quickly say what a Citizens' Assembly is again. A Citizens' Assembly, the way it works in Ireland, is that you pick 100 people who reflect the demographics of society, of the people over 18 in society. So if you have 10% of your population is over 65, then 10 out of 100 people at your Citizens' Assembly are over 65. And if 50% of your population are women, then 50 people in your Citizens' Assembly are women. So those people are a reflection, those 100 people at your Citizens' Assembly are like a jury, normal people who reflect the ordinary people in society. And they don't think about the topic that they're being given to discuss in 3 words. They're thinking about it for months. And they have experts come in and they discuss it with each other as human beings. They break down into little groups of 4. They listen, they think about it, they reflect on it over a period of time. And then they vote and they come up with proposals and they bring the proposals back to the public. And those proposals are discussed in the media. And it seemed, magically, it seemed to work. Amazingly, we solved a problem that had been a problem for 40 years. And that problem was, how do we legislate for abortion? Now, in other countries, in the United States, the judges decided. The Supreme Court made a decision and said that abortion should be allowed because it was a right to privacy or something. In the United Kingdom, there was a loophole. You could find a doctor who agreed that an abortion would be best for the woman's health. Certain doctors would sign this thing. Effectively, it was a loophole, but there never really had been a clear decision. Now, as a politician, I have to admit that I knew that talking about abortion was a vote loser. It was something where you would just lose because there were 2 extreme positions. There were people who said they were pro-choice. In other words, you should be allowed an abortion in every circumstance ever. And then there were people who were pro-life. You should never be allowed an abortion ever in any circumstance. And the in between, there was no room. You had to say you were A or B. The Citizens' Assembly found a position in between. So, I mean, it was as simple as that. They put it back to the public. And then we voted, not the members of Parliament, the people, the general public went down and voted to change their constitution, and everybody in Ireland had a vote on whether or not they wanted to agree with this compromise, and 2/3 of people agreed with the compromise. So we ended up with a situation where society had made a decision about a difficult moral issue, but they'd made it by a large majority, and they'd made it directly themselves, not through their politicians. And so, as you said, I think Art was saying, it suddenly seemed like this could be the solution to everything. It was a magic silver bullet. We could fix all the problems, all the difficult problems in society. So we did marriage equality to allow gay people to get married, and so we thought, yeah. So we've got that one first, then abortion, and then we put down a number of other issues, which with varying success, I should say. Okay, so I'll give you an example of one that's just happened now, which was drugs. And again, it could be a polarized issue. Are you in favor of justice against evil drug dealers, or are you in favor of compassion towards sick people who are addicts? You've got to pick one or the other. Which one are you going to go for? And in fact, I felt that the public, the general public, had moved on from that, had a different position, and would come to an intelligent decision if they were allowed to have a Citizens' Assembly. And I pushed for that. When the negotiations for the current government in Ireland were on, I asked for a Citizens' Assembly. It did happen, and it's completed. And its recommendation is that the Parliament look at legislating to decriminalise the use of drugs, and at the same time to provide a lot of supports for people who are addicts to match that. So in other words, to reduce harm from drugs, to reduce deaths from drugs, and not to concentrate on trying to arrest people and put people in prison. So I guess looking back on these Citizens' Assemblies, what have we learned? What things work and what things don't work? I think the first thing is to make sure that we have a clear question. You don't want to go into a Citizens' Assembly and say, how do I solve justice? Or how do I make education better? Because it's too loose, there are too many dimensions, and it's not clear what problem you're trying to solve. So let's just zero in on a problem. So with drugs, it's the harm from drugs, the death, and the illness that people suffer from addiction. How do you cure that? Secondly, is to have not too many Citizens' Assemblies. So a Citizens' Assembly is something that is an event. It's a public event. It's reported in the media, and everybody can think about it. If you have one every week, then there will be Citizens' Assemblies, people won't even notice that they've happened, and there won't be that public input from people examining what happened to the Citizens' Assembly in the media. So we have 4 during the course of this 5-year government in Ireland, and as Art was saying to me earlier, he believes that's about right. 1 a year sounds about right, because you can have too many, too much of a good thing. And lastly, just to remember, a lot of problems in society are a balance of rights. So there is a right to life, there's a right for a fetus to live, and there is a right for a mother to choose to be pregnant or to choose to enter pregnancy. And that balance of rights changes during the term of the pregnancy. It shifts from the mother to the child. On the last day of pregnancy, of course you can't have an abortion. On the first day, it would be a bit much to force a woman to bring a 1-day-old pregnancy to term. So this was the balance of rights, and that balance of rights exists again and again throughout society. The right to live in a clean environment or to protect the environment versus the right to make a livelihood in your business, and so on. The rights to justice, the rights to protecting people from the harm from drugs. We have to find that compromise, and a way that works, a thoughtful way to do that, is through a citizens' assembly. It's something that I suppose it's a newish idea. It's something to copy, and I want to thank Art O'Leary for the work that he did to set it up. Thank you.
Thank you again. And it was actually great to hear and actually put yourself in that interview seat of, are you for or against? Are you this? Are you that? Our politics has lost nuance, and hopefully this is a way to add it so that people get a different starting point, and then members are actually able to engage with that middle ground position already established by citizens. I also wanted to highlight, and thank you, in most of my conversations with governments, we do try to focus people on what's the hardest part of the question. And I heard that come out in your speech just then, to say, ask a clear question. A very simple question that's relevant to people's lives is a great starting point. Hopefully for anyone watching this on the YouTube as well, you do sit there and think, my issue is so difficult, it will defy resolution. Regardless of what you may think of the issue, if one can approach reforming abortion law in Ireland, most politicians we speak to do nod and sagely say, all right, that's much more difficult than what I'm facing. So this is tested in the real world. Now, I'm very hopeful that with the magic of technology, we're now going to cross to Paris, where Gaetane, Ricard-Nihoul, and I look hopefully at the AV people at the back who are now going to throw up the Zoom on screen. Any moment now. Gaetane is now going to tell us an equally challenging story. Imagine now taking this and being looking across the European Union. So in the European Commission, you span all sorts of cultures, all sorts of languages, all sorts of preferences. And you get handed the job to say, we need to know what Europe thinks. 390 million people. Very complex environment. And with that, Gaetane, hopefully you can hear us. Please tell us the story of what you've been achieving in Europe. Gaetane.
Hello, I hope you can hear me. Is everything okay?
Loud and clear and perfect. I'm away from the mic, Gaetane.
Okay.
We're yours.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for waking me up actually with these very inspiring first interventions. And I'm very glad that I can be here to share with you this incredible experience that we've had at the EU level. And very happy that the European Commission is co-leading this cohort with Ireland, which you've heard have been a pioneer in the field of citizen assembly. I will not go back to the why. I think that Iain has explained that very well, and the speakers after him. I just want to say that basically we know that we have to fight and protect our democracy against challenges and threats today, but we believe also in the EU that we also have to build resilience within our democracy. It's about empowering citizens also in between election, have active citizens taking part in meaningful experiences of participatory and deliberative democracy. We had a big change maker moment at EU level, which was the conference on the future of Europe. It was really an unprecedented experiment of participatory and deliberative democracy, a big endeavor of 1 year long. And one of the main features of that experiment were 4 pan-European citizen assemblies. So we call them the European Citizens Panels. Which were indeed randomly selected across the EU and worked for a year on collective recommendations on nothing else than the future of Europe. And they then work together with, in a plenary, with elected representatives, with organized civil society, with local authorities to produce proposals, 50 proposals, more than 300 measures for the future of Europe, on which we are still working today and following up. One of the big major proposals made by the citizens and the elected representative who took part there is actually to continue with more citizen participation and deliberative democracy at EU level. So one of the follow-up we are working on now is to consolidate, reinforce our whole ecosystem of citizen participation and deliberative democracy. And one of the main follow-up moments of the Conference on the Future of Europe was our President von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, who said in her State of the Union speech that the European Citizens Panels were to become a regular feature of our democratic society in Europe. And so we've been working on embedding these European Citizens Panel in the policy-making process of the European Commission. As you know, the European Commission proposes a policy initiative in the EU system, and so we are involving citizens when we are preparing policy initiative. So at the very beginning of a proposal, a legislative or non-legislative, we are randomly selected citizens to take part in the European Citizen Panel, asking them to make recommendations to inspire drafting these policy proposals. So this is the model that now we are doing at pan-EU level, and we've done already 3 in 2023, and we go therefore on topics which are linked to the work program. So we identified a topic that is very relevant for citizens to help inspire policymakers. And these topics can be quite different. And to give you an illustration, this year, for example, we are doing one which is ongoing now on energy efficiency. And we will be soon opening one on a difficult topic, which is how do we fight the rise of hatred and hate speech in our societies. So very, very interesting topic and very challenging and inspiring moments. You can see from all the speakers that this is a transforming life experience for the citizens who take part, but also for those who observe them and organize them. It really gives hope in democracy. And this is why we are all here and inspired to talk to you today. The strengths of these European citizens' assemblies, I think my colleagues have mentioned many of them, but I would highlight maybe 3 of them. First of all, the diversity that they bring to democracy. I think our democracies are dying from this lack of diversity. You know, people tending to speak in their social media bubbles, not really anymore confronted with really different views. And so we are creating a group, randomly selected citizens, but we create a group which is representative of EU diversity. In our case, we randomly select 150 citizens, and it's a diversity that is, of course, like in the case of Ireland, about gender, about age, about socioeconomic background, but it is also, in our case, a diversity of nationalities and the diversity of languages, since we organize these assemblies with 24 different languages with interpretation, which is a key support in these European assemblies. So diversity is key. The second element I would like to highlight, which is also very much lacking in our democracy nowadays, is that we have a true space for collective deliberation and dialogue. I think previous speakers have mentioned it. We tend to have a polarized debate. We tend to have not much time in our democracy to really speak and go to the bottom of a topic and discuss it in a peaceful environment. And these assemblies, these European Citizens Panel, really create the conditions for this very respectful dialogue. And anytime you will, if you have a chance to observe one of these assemblies, you will be struck by that. On any topic, even the most difficult one, you do feel this very respectful dialogue. It doesn't happen by chance. We do create the conditions by having professional facilitators, by taking time. In the case of the EU level, we take 3 weekends to organize this, but there are other examples like in France with the climate convention or the convention on the end of life, where they can take up to 7 weekends to finalize their recommendations. And this is my last point on the strengths of this citizen assembly. I think the last element I would like to highlight is the fact that citizens have to come up with collective recommendations. You know, as I said, in our societies, which tend to be increasingly individualized, with the idea that in social media you're alone talking to the entire world. We also have increasing polarization. We ask people to agree on recommendations, and they reach them by consensus. Sometimes there is voting, but most of the time there is a very, very high support for the final recommendation. And in our democracies, I think this has become very, very important and precious. So this is the thing that we are trying to do with the European Citizens Panels is really, and this is important, I think the previous speakers have mentioned it, this wouldn't raise trust in societies if we do not take care of the follow-up and the feedback to the citizens. Of course, this is an important phase in the development of a citizen assembly. What do we do with the recommendations? So what we are trying to do now is really create a process where it is embedded in the policymaking, and we have rendezvous. We have moments to discuss this with citizens and with policymakers. So for us, it means for the European Citizens Panels that we have now a new document that is called a Citizens Report that explain how the recommendations have been taken into account and is adopted by the College of Commissioners, by the European Commission themselves, and then sent to the two co-legislators, which is the European Parliament and the Council, and they can see the citizens' recommendation and how they were taken into account by the Commission. And very importantly, we always planned a moment of feedback to the citizens who participated so that they know what was done with their input, because they spend quite a lot of time doing this. They do it with a lot of heart and very seriously, and they need to get some feedback. And finally, I wanted to highlight one element, because very often we tend to say, okay, this is very nice. These citizen assemblies are fantastic. They're doing a great job. Everyone who participated in them are convinced. And so I would really encourage you, if you have a chance, to go and see it. But they are not so connected to the wider debate. They are a small group. So what can we do with it? How can they be a bit more visible and really part of the public debate? So at EU level, we have decided we just launched a citizen engagement platform, which is a deliberative space online. So people can actually contribute with ideas, but also exchange with one another in 24 languages. And for example, in the case of the Citizens Panel on energy efficiency, we have at the same time a debate ongoing on the platform, and regularly we feed in the deliberation of the panel, of the European Citizens Panel, the results of what's going on the platform, so that people outside also have a chance to be part of the process, propose ideas, and these ideas can inspire the work of the Pan-European Assembly. So I think I will stop here. Thank you so much for the time you gave me to explain this absolutely fantastic experience. I would like to say that we do have spaces for observers. So if anyone wants to see this miracle happening with 24 languages and citizens coming from all over Europe and all walks of life to actually to manage together to bring recommendations which are meaningful for the European Commission, they're very welcome and invited to take part. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Gaetane, and she will be available for the Q&A shortly. So what I hope you're starting to get a feel for is very practical and very difficult examples, very difficult issues from Ireland. I don't even want to think about doing 24 languages. Now, for many of the people watching it, hopefully this is persuasive. Wow, these are difficult issues being taken on substantively. Picking up an issue of people not feeling they have a voice in our democracy, and instead, through the stratified sampling, seeing people like them in the decision, not just people in suits in parliaments who we all start to look a little bit the same. Now, as you tell this story, and as hopefully some of you watching will think, I need to tell the boss about this, whether that's a minister or a department head, I need to show someone this technique, there will come a point where, as I faced over a dozen years, people look at you like you've got two heads. You're about to do what? You're about to take a random group of people who don't know anything and you're going to give them this issue that is so politically difficult for us. And on that journey, what I hope you'll do, one of your first stops, will be the OECD publications in this area. It started out, it's one of the most persuasive things we use. We're a little NGO. Look at what the OECD have done in assessing projects around the world, obviously focused on OECD nations as well. And, well, I don't want to steal any thunder, they've expanded so far beyond that. So to give a sense of the analysis, research and thought going in at a governance layer looking across countries, I'd like to hear from Gillian Dorner. Thank you, Ella. Thank you.
Thank you, Iain, you're too kind. Minister Art, I have to say I never get bored of the Irish example, and I use it a lot with our stakeholders. It's probably the best example that we have. And Gaetane, I couldn't agree with you more when you say that we need to both protect our democracies from, for example, mis and disinformation, from foreign interference. We also need to build resilience. And in particular, we need to address this sense that citizens do not feel that they have a voice. And before I start going through our work on deliberative democracy, I just want to back this up with some evidence, which is what we do at the OECD. The OECD survey on drivers of trust in public institutions from 22 OECD countries, and that will be expanded to 30 OECD countries when we publish the next round in June, shows that less than 1/3 of people, 30%, say that the political system in their country lets them have a say in what the government does, and only 1/3 of people think their government would adopt opinions expressed in a public consultation. There is work to be done there, that is for sure. Another thing I just wanted to mention before I go into our data on deliberative democracy is that we need to look at this in a holistic way. We have a number of tools at our disposal. We have representative democracy, of course, and that is the mainstay of our democracies, but there are also a number of different tools at hand, and deliberative democracy, including citizens' assemblies, is one of those. And what we need to do better is to understand when to use them, how to use them, what time to use them at, and how to then map this out so that our democracies are better at engaging citizens at the right time, in the right way. Because at the moment it does feel, in certain contexts, though I feel Ireland's made a lot of progress in this space, it feels a bit like what we call whack-a-mole. We've got a problem, we need to find a way of getting citizens involved, so we're going to use a citizens' assembly or we're going to use a public consultation, but not really thinking through what the best approach might be. So on that note, let me move on to my slides, and I don't know if they're up on the screen. Okay, so we've collected data and evidence that shows representative, I've got a clicker, thank you, that representative deliberative processes are being used by governments across OECD countries at all levels of government and on very diverse topics. In this presentation, I want to walk you through the main trends that we've observed in 2023 based on the data collected from the OECD Deliberative Democracy database. In a nutshell, we've seen a trend with a steady adoption of representative deliberative processes across OECD countries, suggesting that it is seen as a trusted mechanism for public authorities to engage citizens and enhance the quality of public decisions. So, Iain, when you say people look at you like you're slightly mad, I think that may have been the case, but I think we're making progress, thanks to people like you. So this is good news. So let me move on. Okay. So between September 2021 and September 2023, we collected 160 new cases of representative deliberative processes. The OECD database has a total of 733 cases from 1979 to 2023. It now includes data from 34 countries, with 96% of cases situated within OECD member countries. This new evidence underscores sustained growth and expanding reach of the deliberative wave, as we call it at the OECD. Since 2021, the deliberative wave reached 5 new countries, including 2 OECD member countries, New Zealand and Colombia, and 3 non-OECD member countries, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Georgia, and Montenegro. So, what this slide shows here is what some of the policy issues are that these processes have been used for. The environment and other long-term contentious policy issues are the main topic addressed by deliberative processes at the moment. Democracy naturally suffers from a short-term perspective, partly due to the incentives of electoral democracy that diminishes its ability to solve long-term challenges and protect the interests of future generations. As I'm sure Graham, who we'll be hearing from after me, will attest to. Greater citizen participation in combination with democratic representation can support long-term governance by broadening the spectrum of participants, for example, to future generations, improving the quality and inclusion of the decision-making and strengthening the legitimacy of the whole system. In 32% of the new cases collected by the OECD, citizens were tasked to produce recommendations related to the green agenda. For example, in Estonia, 55 citizens deliberated to shape a more climate-friendly future in an area called Tartu. And at the European level, as part of what Gaetane was talking about, 150 citizens presented 23 recommendations to reduce food waste. In addition, the second category of issues that you can see on the chart there, addressed by deliberative processes, relate to contentious decisions where policymakers need to weigh diverse opinions and find consensus, such as urban and strategic planning and infrastructure. So we talk a lot about institutionalizing deliberative processes, and I think this means a number of things. It means bringing it in to our existing representative democracies, and I think this is demonstrated well in the Irish case, where this is very much connected with the representative decision makers and not seen as a completely separate process. I think it also means institutionalizing deliberative processes within our governments, so that this isn't just a small office of people that are really gung-ho about the idea of deliberative processes, but everyone thinks is mad. This is about bringing it into all parts of government and for it to be seen as a genuinely useful tool to be deployed as and when necessary. But it can also mean establishing a legal or cultural form of recurrence to a deliberative process, going beyond this one-off process and embedding it into existing decision-making structures. And we have some good examples of that. It helps to ensure that they're continuity regardless of political change, and it increases the opportunities for citizens to participate in such processes. Our findings show that institutionalized, or what we call permanent, cases collected by the OECD multiplied between 2020 and 2023, going from 22 to 41, so still not a huge number, the majority of which are implemented by subnational governments at the local or regional levels. So, for example, in the city that I live in, Paris, we have a Paris Citizens Assembly of 100 members, which is currently deliberating on how to support individuals experiencing homelessness, as well as on the barriers currently faced by the city to increase green spaces. Other forms include connecting deliberation to parliamentary committees, such as in Belgium, or giving people the right to demand a deliberative process itself, as is in the case in Austria. So we actually have, very usefully, a set of OECD good practice principles for deliberative processes to promote inclusive and accountable deliberative processes. Our evidence shows that representative deliberative processes can address the inclusion problems usually faced by other forms of participation, such as open consultation. I think that was very clear from the examples that we've already heard. For example, participation is often encouraged and supported through remuneration, so people are actually paid, the coverage of expenses, or providing childcare for people that are participating in these processes. In fact, in 74% of the cases in our database, participants received some form of compensation to support their participation. Public authorities tend to be more responsive and accountable to deliberative processes for participants. In most cases, they respond to participants and implement at least half of the inputs received. And I think this is key. It's one of the points that Art made, which is you have to be clear at the outset what you're going to do with the results of the process. Otherwise, you can really disappoint people if their expectations are not met. Further data demonstrates that when responding to participants, public authorities favoured a face-to-face setting, which I think is always been the case in Ireland, although you may have done some online, showing commitment and respect to the engagement of citizens. And this was the case in 54% of the cases in our database. So, this database that I talk about is a compendium of representative deliberative processes, and institutions from all over the world are covered in it. It was originally published in 2019 and updated in 2021 and 2023. The cases included in it meet the following criteria: deliberation, a minimum of 1 full day of face-to-face, online, or hybrid meetings; representation, a group of randomly selected citizens stratified to be broadly representative of the community they intend to represent; and finally, impact, commissioned by a public authority. The objective is to inform OECD work on democracy and citizen participation, as well as to provide a database for governments to look into and see where they might be able to get examples of best practice. The database is accessible online and can be accessed through the QR code that you can see on the screen just now. So in order to support public authorities in the design, implementation, and evaluation of deliberative processes, the OECD has also developed the Deliberative Democracy Toolbox, a set of resources that aim to, 1, discover. So the report, The Innovative Citizen Participation in New Democratic Institutions Catching the Deliberative Wave, publication from 2020, explores trends in such processes, identifies different models, and analyzes the trade-offs among different design choices, as well as the benefits and limits of public deliberation. Then to implement, they are, as I already mentioned, the OECD Good Practice Principles for deliberative processes for public decision-making. Then to evaluate, the OECD Evaluation Guidelines for representative deliberative processes, and finally, to embed. We have the OECD paper on 8 ways to institutionalize deliberative democracy, which is an excellent guide for public officials and policymakers, outlining 8 models for institutionalizing representative public deliberation to improve collective decision-making and strengthen democracy. So we're nearly there. In closing, the core strength of democracies is their ability to continuously benefit from collective intelligence through mechanisms for representation and participation. But to reap the full benefits, we need to ensure that all segments of society are included in those mechanisms. And listen, we don't have all the answers, that's for sure. We'd like to invite those of you who are very interested in this process to join us at the end of October in Milan, where we'll be holding the OECD's Global Forum on Building Trust and Reinforcing Democracy, where we'll be looking at this question of the new frontiers of citizen participation. What works, what doesn't work, and what do we need to do next? So thank you very much for listening to me.
And thank you, Gillian. Now, a few of you will be feeling like you've been hit with a fire hose. That's a lot of talking. Now, I hope there's some questions, a provocation. And if there aren't questions, the simplest thing is I always tend to just pick on the American guests in the room. So, Courtney, you better be praying. If I can open up to any questions, and I will just repeat them for the benefit of the microphone. I've got a gentleman over here.
Thanks for the presentation. Like, hearing these stories, it seems like it's an affirmation of what I've been thinking about democracy, which is that, like, democracy is not about a delegation of thought and spirit, maybe of power. We need to make sure that individuals keep on making sure that their input are valued and that they think for themselves as well. But that said, besides a happy story, I like to say that there's a lot of big ifs going behind this process. Like, for example, one of the strengths that were mentioned was representation. And I've heard some stuff regarding like deliberative democracy on especially whether the representation that the Irish government chose was necessarily representative of the Irish population. Like, we see that in the result that there was a close connection between like abortion, but we shouldn't forget that there were other projects that were taken within the Irish government regarding this as well. And those things were not necessarily same in success with the abortion case. And I'd like to ask like whether this kind of like true representation is being thought upon more thoroughly, and how it's how it is being developed through, because like there are issues like retention, for example. If you're a poor person who needs to work on a day job, then remuneration is going to be very important for them to keep on staying. And while the OECD mentions that many people are getting remunerations, the question really is it really enough? Because I've heard in an article that it's mostly travel costs sometimes. Well, is that going to really suffice when it comes to a mom who has 2 kids and dad's also working as well? So I think that's kind of like a problem. Like, it may begin with true representation, but can it remain as true representation? And can it even begin as true representation?
So I think there's about 11 questions in there for you, Art. And I think you can maybe start with the recruitment one, and perhaps whether you changed your recruitment method along the way.
Yeah, yes, indeed. And we've been on a journey in relation to recruitment, and we have taken Iain's advice on many occasions during the course of this process. Every Citizens' Assembly was better than the one that went beforehand. You know, the whole idea is that it is iterative, we learn, and our last couple of Citizens' Assemblies, to my mind, were truly some of the most representative. I mean, the government doesn't always accept Citizens' Assembly recommendations, and that's absolutely their right, because they have bigger and wider issues to consider. Our gender equality Citizens' Assembly made a recommendation that they would be willing to pay more tax in order to see their recommendations implemented. And the government said, whoa, wait a minute now, if we're going to raise taxes, maybe we'd like to build some roads or schools or a children's hospital or something like that. So you have to leave the power with the government, who are elected to make these difficult decisions. You have really hit on the issue of representation. There are a number of really hard to reach groups, and these are people living on minimum wage who are difficult for us. I've always considered members of Citizens' Assemblies, when I worked with them, to be my children, but they're actually my boss. So I have, on countless occasions, rung the bosses of people working, particularly in hospitality, to say the government needs John next weekend on Saturday and Sunday, so can you arrange a double shift another occasion to make up the hours that they lost? And in those circumstances, the amount of money that we pay the individuals really makes a difference and is encouraging. You hit on something else as well, which is also important. Our hardest group to recruit as citizens are women between the age of 25 and 44. They tend to be women with caring responsibilities, either for children or for our aging parents. We pay for childcare for individuals, and this is, maybe they don't have childcare, maybe a husband or a partner or a wife ends up minding the children a weekend when somebody's away. We give them an amount of money which says, we acknowledge that there is a cost to you, your personal life, for this. Or in some circumstances, we tell them, bring the whole family with you at the weekend. We stay in a nice hotel, there's a swimming pool. I need to go to work during the day, I'll see you for dinner tonight, and so enjoy the weekend, because the whole idea is to make it as representative as possible. We do what has to be done to make it better. We learned every step of the way. Our first one, certainly had a lot of room to improve, as you indicated, but our fourth, fifth, sixth, and our soon-to-be seventh one, we're very, very happy that they are representative.
Thank you. And I've got another question over here in the front, just to make our mic runner really work.
The examples that you all gave were very much around established democracies. And I'm very curious, what could be a few prerequisites or building blocks for incorporating citizen assemblies into other countries that might not be as well established in terms of their level of democracy as other places? That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. I might actually take that one, because as part of a contract, not a staged question, for the UN Democracy Fund, they picked a number of countries for us to go and work in. One was Malawi, which is the third lowest income country in the world. One was North Macedonia, where we were asked to work during COVID because they were the most vaccine hesitant country on earth. So we asked them an open question. Again, to your point, how do we protect ourselves from COVID? We did stratification of half planning to take a vaccine, half not planning to take a vaccine, and asked them to find common ground. I think the answer to your question lies in principles, not a method. What I do in Australia and what we do in Malawi are unrecognisable to one another. But remember those 5 principles we stepped through at the start? Random selection in Australia, and indeed Ireland, involves taking massive either land titles or electoral databases, doing electronic sampling, printing out and dropping 20,000 invitations. In Malawi, as we spoke to local people there, there's not only no databases, there's no street names, there's no dwelling numbers. And we said, how do you reach people? They said, well, we have a market day. Everyone comes to the highway on a given day. They have baskets of produce. He went through that market and handed out coloured bits of paper, had a tin with a half a dozen sticks with paint dipped to the bottom at the end, had a little kid pull one of the sticks out. There was a yellow bit of paint on the end. Anyone holding a yellow bit of paper had just been sampled. Think of the principles. It was a population-wide sample, random, trusted, so it fits. So you can adapt there. In Australia, we do very extensive written materials for participants, up to 300 pages. This was an environment where it was about community development funds, which are often nicknamed family development funds, across Africa, where it was very untrusted, and a federal member of parliament had asked us to see it. How did they assess those projects? A lot of the participants simply walked to where the projects were. And we were a little surprised first up, going, some of these things are 12 kilometres away. No problem. That's what we're used to doing here. So the method of learning was sheets of numbers and sheets of data, not reams of it, but experiential, that local knowledge of, well, I'm going to ask people I know what this would cost to build. It's the principles of a cross-section of the population, time to think, detailed information, it's a lot better than just saying my politician is corrupt. So it's very applicable, and local knowledge matters a great deal. We haven't really encountered somewhere where we'd say it's blocked. I'll just hand to Art as well.
Yeah, just a very quick addition to this, and it's lovely to see you, Courtney, in person, having seen you for so long on a screen. Sometimes it's easier to build something new when it didn't exist before. You know, some of the real struggles we've had in convincing people about the power of citizens' assemblies is in well-established working democracies. So I never worry too much about the struggle. Yeah, the struggle is real, but sometimes it is, no, we don't need anything else. It works just fine. So I would welcome the opportunity to work with a democracy which was less well established, because you walk into an empty room and you build something. You don't have to break something first. You build it from scratch, from the ground up. And that's certainly an element of what we did in Ireland.
So we may have time for one more question. I am mindful the Minister has a clashing commitment very shortly. If you need to, I was going to do a pause and thanks if you needed to sneak out before we hand to Graham, or, okay, we'll run closer to 3:30. I was trying to do eye contact to see if you needed to leave. Is there one further question? Now there's lots. I'm going to go to the young lady here in the middle.
Hello, I'm a university student who's studying in politics, and I'm quite interested in deliberative democracy. Actually, in Korean, there were about roughly 3 or 4 attempts trying to replicate the citizen assembly, and the results of them were quite politically questioned. So I actually wanted to ask how you guys have solved in your countries. The questions that we had were like, when the policy at the question is a part of the president's election pledge, the citizens' assembly's result is questioned quite politically. Firstly, it was about how were the given viewpoints and information balanced enough politically so that it's not biased. And secondly, it was about how these randomly chosen people, why do they have the right to get to speak? They might reflect the citizens' viewpoint, but why do they have the right to speak for others? And third was about if they are having these citizen assembly not temporarily, permanently, then isn't this a way of kind of simply trespassing assembly and kind of limiting the power of assembly to kind of make decisions for the country? I thought the main 3 questions were these 3, and I wanted to ask how you have answered these questions in your country.
I'm super happy to take it on, but I'm looking and sharing the... Gillian, Mike.
Sorry, thank you. I'll take one and then I'll hand over for the rest, which is actually, I think the Minister made it quite clear in terms of your final question on kind of bypassing Parliament or the National Assembly. The idea is that it doesn't bypass. First, because often these are issues that are chosen that are almost too politically difficult for parliaments and representative bodies to deal with. There's too much, as the Minister was explaining, there are extreme views at either end of the spectrum. And the other is that you build the Citizens' Assembly in a way that brings the views of the citizens to the Parliament before any final decisions are made. I think that hopefully answers that question. I'll now pass over to Art or Iain.
I mean, I'd like to ask a question in return. Have you tried to do a Citizens' Assembly in Korea? Is that what you said? Have you made an attempt to do that?
Not myself, but Korea's government has.
Yeah.
And those 3 questions were kind of like questions that were on the journals or journalisms. So I was I just wanted to ask how you've solved in Ireland.
Because I can see that in the week that I've been in Korea that there seems to be a lot of interest from people in expressing themselves democratically. I see a lot of people on the street. I mean, right outside my hotel the first day I came. There's a demonstration there. So it seems that there's a lot of interest from people and a lot of freedom of expression to raise issues. So I would have thought that a citizens' assembly, that it would be possible, or certainly to try it.
Yeah, certainly. I think, without going over the ground that was covered earlier, when this comes out on YouTube, we should have at least one viewer. You should go back and watch the proceedings, because I think myself and Gaetane and Gillian gave a number of indicators as to what makes a citizens' assembly work. And if any one of these factors is off even slightly, then there could be a difficulty. And without wanting to rehash over the old ground. I was interested in your question. I mean, why do these randomly selected citizens have the right to speak? For example, women between the age of 25 and 44, they don't represent women between the age of 25 and 44. They have a personal life experience. They're there in their own right. So they're not, farmers aren't representing farmers, they just happen to be farmers, you know, and that's the issue. There is no right conferred on them to speak on anyone's behalf, only themselves. It's the random selection issue which makes this work, because it turns out, after all, that they are representative.
With that, thank you. And I believe that was the nuclear power project, was it?
Yeah, and there was something, another one about election system, and another one about education policy.
Look, I think I'm getting some wonderful waves from the Irish embassy. So, Minister, I believe your time. I will thank you for attending there.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
But if everyone else cannot escape, just before I hand over to Graham, who's going to give us the stirring words. We've heard some very practical project examples, and Graham's about to take us on a journey of dreaming big. To the questioner who just posed that, it's often the people who criticise the way government is done today. They want to rail against politicians. I don't like how things are. And then they also rail against things that are new. So I often put it back and say, can people really have it both ways? If you don't like the system, you can't really complain about pilot projects that attempt to change it. But as Out noted, there's lots of ways to do this well and do it not so well. Hopefully the OECD books are a pretty good starting point as well. Now, we wanted to end with a bit of a bang. And Graham Allen is a 30-year retired MP, and he should deliver us that bang. Graham has 3 big inspirational ideas that he wants to bring out. This has been a very experienced presentation so far, every practical project. We've delivered you and shown you what's happened. But Graham wants to share with you what should happen from here. Graham, over to you.
Thanks, Ian. Great to join you from London early in the morning. Thomas Jefferson once said that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And he was followed a couple of years ago by Joe Biden, who said when opening the Summit for Democracy, that democracy doesn't happen by accident. We have to renew it with each generation. So I want to talk about how we can renew what we are doing in the Summit for Democracy. We're now 3 years old. We've got a future ahead of us, many very big problems to tackle. But we need some big answers to come up from the summit to give us that inspiration for the future. So firstly, one of the questioners asked about countries that are no longer democratic or are on a journey to democracy. It's really important. When we were born 3 years ago, the first Summit for Democracy was before the war against Ukraine. And while it's essential to help them and to inoculate the new democracies against autocracy, it's just as important, equally important, to strengthen existing democracies and toughen the rules-based architecture that we have for our international democracy. So we're challenged, I think, on one of the slides to think bigger. And I've got a view on what we could be looking at over the next year or so, but I think we need to think smarter too. We need to look at our own organization and get better, more nimble in answering some of the difficult questions. So what do we really want from the Summit for Democracy? What should it look like? What should it be like in 2025, next year? How do we make the summit even more relevant and feared by dictators and autocrats? So on one of the slides, there's a question, well, there's two questions. The first one is, what can the summit do throughout the year between our annual summit gatherings? The summit itself is brilliantly organized, fantastic summit team, but what can we do between that period of those summits? The second question that's worth thinking about is, what is the global institutional architecture needed to support the summit? And as Iain mentioned, I'm going to talk about very briefly about 3 examples which have been put forward by our own deliberative democracy and citizens assembly cohort. Those 3 are a global citizens assembly, a global what works for democracy. In other words, one place where all the evidence is gathered together and we can actually give that evidence out to those people who need it in a suitable way and get people engaged and get deliberative democracy, give people that first leg up to actually start their own journey on deliberative democracy. And then the third one is, how do we roll out in a systematic way deliberative democracy and take examples which will help people, particularly in new democracies. And we've done a little bit of work focusing very much on Eastern and Central Europe as a sort of test bed, a test drive for how that might work. So we're perfectly capable of answering those 2 big questions. And it was great to hear Jill and the other stories too, but great to hear Jill talk about the modern democracy's fantastic success story. Sometimes we're a bit depressed. We look at what's happening in America, sometimes in the UK, and say, my goodness, is democracy seriously on the decline? Well, some of the figures indicate that it has its problems, but we also have brilliant successes. And you are in the cohort that is part of that great success, and that is 760 successful citizens' assemblies in recent times on the planet. Jill will correct me if that figure's gone up from 760, but that was the latest OECD number. Now, every organization represented at the cohort and at the summit will soon be reviewing their interactions with the summit. They'll be feeding back their experiences and their hopes for what could happen over the next year. I hope very much that people take that job very seriously, because it will begin to create a meaningful process, an interaction of improving the summit itself. We need our summit. We need it to be clear. We need it to be strong. And we need it to be more than just 1 week in the year. Good as that week is, we need that constant interaction to try and develop what we are and who we are. Every supporter of the summit, every cohort, every deliberative Democrat should be enabled, facilitated to put forward their own practical agenda into the summit. And that needs a lot of thought from those of us engaged with the summit or actually working for the summit. So having a continual dialogue sounds like a very boring bureaucratic phrase, but actually is the next serious step for the Summit for Democracy, and should be, I hope, considered as one of the most important legacies of the summit, and possibly one of the most important achievements of our wonderful hosts, the South Korean government. We will need everyone's help in doing that, whether you belong to the Global Democracy Coalition, Partners for Democracy, all the national governments represented here, every NGO and many, many others, many other organizations and individuals. So the call I'm making, the call to action for people, is to work out a process by which we can all be involved between summits and to actually build some sustainable global architecture to support democracy. And our own cohort, drawing on the energy generated by our global network of deliberative Democrats, produced an agenda, as Iain said, a menu of 11 deliberative options offered to each individual nation to pick out what were the things that they could do, the very ambitious ones and the easy starter ones that they could do. Now, that inspiration, that was inspiration for us and led to what Iain mentioned as the projects that we put a lot of work into. And there were 3 of them, and I'll just go over them very, very briefly. Firstly, as I mentioned, the What Works organization, and that is quite simply a place where information and all the best intelligence we have can be held in one place in the world, which is open to everybody for free. And I think looking at how we do that will be quite significant. There's been some significant and serious work done on that particular thing, led by Mahmoud Farouk from University of Arizona. And you can access that work just by going to the link that is on the slide, which should be available to you. And you'll see the work that's been done there. And that is the way we can share our information and enable people to pick up the best practice that there is out there. And there's a lot of it now, and it's well worth delving into. The second issue is around creating a citizens' assembly at the summit, so that if the summit isn't meeting, nonetheless, a citizens' assembly of our own can actually be discussing the very significant issues that there are in the world around democracy, and putting a report, much as Art said, a report created by Citizens' Assembly in Ireland eventually goes to the Irish Parliament. That actually is the same model that should be operative in our own summit, so that we have effectively a citizens' assembly selected in the way that colleagues have discussed this morning, and that is able to come forward with significant and interesting proposals that we can take on through the summit process itself. And finally, the third interesting thing that we've managed to do, and do, I think, in some depth, and which is available now to be taken forward, is around what we've called a Marshall Plan for deliberation. In other words, how do we roll out less ambitious deliberative democracy in countries that have not experienced it in any shape or form at the moment, and go up that ladder of complexity and depth of engagement? How do we get people to engage with that process? And there has to be a sort of purpose-built way of doing that through developing our citizens' deliberation. And we started by doing some work in Eastern and Central Europe, and that work has been done really very well indeed, but needs now to be taken to the next level. So again, what is the summit's relationship with how that can be done? That needs some thought, and it needs some interest. So in a way that highlights the organizational steps that we all need to take within the summit itself, and that nettle has to be grasped. Back to President Biden's words, that we have to renew democracy with each generation. In other words, standing still isn't enough, and our challenge is to play our part in helping the Summit for Democracy and their staff to go to that next level over the next year. So when we meet again next year, 2025, we need to look back and say, what did we do as a consequence of this gathering and the other gatherings taking place in Seoul as we speak? Did we start the process of giving real teeth, real activity between summits so that we could move forward? So that's my provocation, as the French would say. And it's all about taking the summit to the next level. And my challenge to our great friends in the Summit for Democracy structure is to ask them, will you commit to at least discussing one of those 3 big proposals that I outlined? And will you challenge every other cohort? We're just one of 12 or 13 cohorts attached to the summit. Will you challenge each of the other cohorts to come forward with a similar offer of 1, 2, or 3 practical proposals and choose one that can be taken forward over the next year? And finally, an interesting question always is, will you look at reviewing the...
Graham, you've blown the clock slightly. So I have to be the Speaker of the
Forgive
Parliament
me.
and pull your mic.
Okay.
What I hope you got to feel there is a member who sat in Westminster for 30 years, and having sat there 30 years, said we need to dream big. And Graham, I hope next year at the summit we're here discussing what the UK government is doing in this field. I hope we're taking up your idea to actually have a real citizens' role attached to a democracy summit. But with that, I do need to bring us to a close. So what I hope you felt is a story that started from one point. Many people feel like they don't have a voice in our democracy. And what I hope you've experienced today is we've got a great way to give people a voice and for the rest of the community to look at that and say, hey, people like me are finally in the decision. With that, I thank all our speakers and thank you for your attention for what was a longer session, but hopefully a real whirlwind tour of our field. Thank you very much.